But I'm not the most observant guy. We have, like, for instance, a stuffed rat that gets passed around in the office. Don't ask, I don't know. But it was on my computer for like 3 weeks before I noticed it. I've never noticed before this moment that Joel has a beard. But see, I'm noticing things this morning I haven't noticed before. I'd never noticed before this morning that there's a big screen up here that can come down. I've wondered what that's used for since we have the others. I never noticed Terry sitting over there before today. So, there's just things I don't notice. But I notice for some weird reason when there is one shoe on the side of the road. Have you noticed that? It just seems like it happens all the time. And a couple of weeks ago, I was noticing the shoe out on the loop. It's not there this morning, so somebody picked it up. But I often think I should be picking them up because the shoe on the side of the road reminds me of the book of Ruth. And the book of Ruth always reminds me of Christmas. And they just go together so well. Doesn't it do that for you? I mean, can you imagine in your home having an evergreen, just all these single mismatched shoes on it? The only thing that would help a single shoe and the book of Ruth and Christmas go together better would be if there was a Christmas song about it. And there is. And this will be on your playlist at Christmas time from now on, and Jaron is going to sing it for us.
Wake up, little Ruthie, wake up. Wake up, little Ruthie, wake up. The situation is grim. It looks like a whole lot of sin. You're at my feet under the sheet. I'll have to take you in. Wake up, little Ruthie. Wake up, little Ruthie. We gotta go home. Well, what are we gonna tell the rabbi? What are we gonna say? What are we gonna tell the village when they say, ooh, oh, vey, wake up a little Ruthie. Wake up a little Ruthie. You were trying to become my wife. I hope I didn't mess your whole life up. Wake up a little Ruthie. Wake up a little Ruthie. Go back to Naomi. Something like that. All right.
All right. That was short nose, Darren. You're awesome. Somebody told me, I think I told you a couple weeks ago, you cannot overdose on prayer, and I don't think you can overdose on Jaron. He just helps me every week, and I just was so blessed by his ministry. But now you're wondering what the heck is going on. How does this shoe and Ruthie and Christmas all fit together? And in order to explain this, I guess I better go back to the beginning. So I invite you to turn with me to the book of Ruth. It's a little book early in the Old Testament. You have the Torah, and then you have Judges. It's the very next book. It's not very long. And it begins by telling us that there was, and by the way, this is about 1,000 years before Jesus, right? About 1,000 years before Jesus. But it begins by telling us about this lady named Naomi. Go back to Naomi. That was kind of so. And Naomi is married, and she has 2 boys, and they live in the Bethlehem area. But there's a famine, and so just in those first few verses, it tells us that they take a trip. They go over the Dead Sea, and they go to this land called Moab, and there the husband dies. But it turns out it's okay because she has 2 sons, and the 2 sons are married, and this is what I would call Medicare Part A in the Old Testament. Medicare. Now, I'm just 67, just retired a year ago, so I've just learned about all these Medicare Part A, B, C, and all this kind of stuff. But Medicare Part A was simply that you had children, and they had children, and everybody provided for the older generations within their own family. Take care of your family. That was the Medicare option Part A, the only option that people really had, it seemed like, in most cases. But this is not an option that has disappeared. I mean, in the New Testament, listen to this. This is 1 Timothy 5:8. And Paul, writing to Timothy, says, anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So this is pretty firm stuff. We're supposed to take care of our families. That's the plan. But sometimes the plan doesn't work out so good. And so we continue very early in this first chapter, and we see that though Naomi had a husband, and he has died, and though Naomi had 2 sons who got married, the sons have died. There are no grandchildren. This part A has not worked out well. And so Naomi says to her daughter-in-laws, listen, the word is that back in Bethlehem, there's food again. So after this wonderful decade here, I'm going back. But you need to go home. This is your home. Go back to your families. They will take care of, they will provide for you. And one daughter-in-law, there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Proof that miracles do happen. A mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law that love each other. Like mother and daughter, they're just so together. And they say goodbye knowing that they will not only never see each other again, they likely will never even know what happens to each other. But Ruthie, she has a different approach. And in chapter 1, verse 16 and 17, Ruth replies, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. And where you die, I will die. And there I'll be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. I was tempted in the first hour to ask how many people had that read at their wedding. It used to be a thing. And it always kind of made me question, because that's not a husband and a wife. That's not a man and a woman. That is a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law, and the daughter-in-law is expressing that much devotion and love for her mother. I'm just going, wow, miracles happen. So if that's not happening in your family, if you're one of those families where you're watching kids that don't take care of parents or grandparents, that sort of thing, that's kind of the norm these days, but that was not the original plan. And Ruthie takes it not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. And so Ruthie travels with Naomi. They go back to Bethlehem. And in chapter 2, verse 2, we pick it up where Ruthie says to Naomi, let me go now to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose field I find favor. And Naomi said to her, go ahead, my daughter. And now we get to Medicare Part B. So Part A was take care of your family. Part B says maybe that's not going as well as it should. There are needy people out there, so we're supposed to do something for those needy people. And it goes back to the books of the law, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 9 and 10. And this is what Moses passes on. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the alien. I am the Lord your God. All right, so let's picture this agricultural culture. Okay, they've got maybe a victory garden with some vegetables growing. They got an orchard with some fruit, nice fruit. They got fields with grain growing. And eventually you have to harvest all that. But while you're harvesting, it doesn't get picked cleanly. Like you could be at a tree and some of the fruit falls to the ground. You could have a basket and some of your basket spills over. You could be going on to the next tree or the next field and look back and going, oh, we missed some. And the law is that you don't go back. You leave leftovers, because today we have people with signs that say, we'll work for food. I don't know if they do or not, but I know back in this day, the poor people worked to survive by going out and getting the leftovers. Isn't that an interesting way to take care of people? Well, we see this issue actually in the New Testament. In Matthew 12, verse 1 and 2, it says, at that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath. Now note this. The gleaning was not unlawful. It was, according to these Pharisees, doing it on a Sabbath that was unlawful. But this is how we know Jesus and his fellow men were poor, because they were permitted to go in and get the leftovers. And they were doing this. So this part B has gone from Old Testament days of Ruth to 1,000 years later to Jesus' day. And people are still getting the leftovers at that time. So Ruth goes out. She starts getting the leftovers. And while she's doing this, she meets the man who is in charge of the field. His name is Boaz. And Boaz, for some interesting reason, he just kind of clicks with what's going on. And he says, this is a special person, and I'm going to help her extra. And so he tells his men, remember the law, don't go back and pick up the other stuff, leave the leftovers. But he says, go ahead and spill some extra. Let's really take care of her. And he says, and while that's going on, don't you dare be hassling her. Which you can imagine this day and age, any day and age, men can do that with women, can't they? They can hassle them. And this is a foreign woman. She's an unmarried woman. She's in this field. Boy, though, they could have taken out after her, but Boaz has said, absolutely not. Boaz must have been woke. And so she gathers not just what might have been done by hard work, she gathers a whole bunch of extra, and she takes it back, and she shows it to Naomi. And Naomi says in 2:20, the Lord bless him. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. Then she added, that man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers or kinsman redeemers. And she has suddenly realized that, okay, we're supposed to have Part A. It didn't go so good. Now we're active in Medicare Part B, and it's going pretty good. But it realizes that we can actually make a claim in Medicare Part C with this kinsman redeemer. Now, this is how the kinsman redeemer works. This is in Deuteronomy, chapter 25, verse 5 and 6, back to the laws of Moses. And Moses writes, if brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's, that's the dead husband's brother, shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of the brother-in-law to her. The first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. Okay, did you get that? There's a man, there's a woman, they don't have any children. The man dies. The woman marries that man's brother and has children, or at least one child with him, but that child will be counted as if he is the child of the dead brother. Thus, you can go back to Medicare Part A and have somebody in a future generation that will provide for you. And men, if you're right now thinking about your sister-in-law and you're going, or women, you're right now thinking about your brother-in-law and you're going, oof. Just remember, if they were here hearing this sermon, they would be thinking the same thing about you. You know, this continues all the way from Ruth's time and 300 years or so before in Moses' time to Jesus' day. Matthew chapter 22, verse 23 and following. It says, the same day the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him with a question. We've talked about how these folks tried to trip Jesus up, right? So here we go again. Teacher, they said, Moses told us that if a man dies without having children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up offspring for him. Now there were 7 brothers amongst them. The first one married and died, and since he had no children, he left his wife to his brother. And the same thing happened to the second and the third brother, right down to the 7th. Finally, the woman died. Now then, at the resurrection, whose wife will she be of the 7, since all of them were married to her? I'm going to burst your bubble perhaps here, because Jesus replies, you're in error, because you do not know the scripture or the power of God. At the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven. And so maybe you're like people that have come up to me at funerals and they say, I'm really sorry my grandma's gone, but now she's with grandpop in their mansion in heaven for all of eternity. And it's kind of like the hospital bed I told you about. I don't think the hospital bedside is the place to correct people's theology. I'm not sure the funeral home is the place to do that either in that time of grief. So, yeah, I just let them think on. But Jesus is saying that's not how it works. And I got to tell you, I probably have known more people who would say, if I get to heaven and share a mansion with my spouse back on earth, then I am not in heaven. That's okay. That's okay. But if you're one of those romantics who this disappoints, then just let me assure you, it's going to be so much better than the best ever marriage here on earth. it'll just be awesome. We just can't even comprehend it now. But we're back to this point. This kinsman redeemer is a plan. It's Medicare Part C. I had to get to my letter there. All right, so what happens? Well, in chapter 3, verse 3, Naomi says to Ruthie, I want you to do something. This is what it says. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know that you're there until he has finished eating and drinking. And so the plot is hatched. This is a kinsman redeemer attempt. Let's see if we can work this. It's not a scheme exactly. It's an honest attempt to see if we can come to agreement here of this process that we've been talking about, brother marrying the widow of brother, okay? So you've been out there working the harvest, and the truth is women don't just glow, they do sweat. And she was probably pretty ripe. And so Naomi has said, go get your annual bath. I know it's not that time of year, but get bathed really well. And then go get some of that perfume we have left over and just bathe in it. This will be awesome. And then go get your posh frock. And then just hang back. Hang back till the work is done. Hang back until the men have had their supper. They've had some wine. And then when they crash, Boaz will be there. He'll be right there with the men. He's a good boss. He'll have a little private place away from everybody on a mat on the threshing floor. And when you're sure he is deep in sleep, then go to him. Take the blanket and uncover his feet, and then take the place of that blanket and just lie there and see what happens. And what happens is that Boaz wakes up and he goes, what the heck is going on? And he realizes what Ruth is doing there. And he realizes that this kinsman redeemer is at play here. And he decides that he will indeed activate the Redeemer clause. But there's some problems with this. The first problem is Boaz is not a brother. He is a distant relative. And so the letter of the law would not require Boaz to do this, but this is interesting. Boaz is not just the letter of the law, he is a spirit of the law kind of guy. And if we could take that, it might help us with some of our biblical interpretation sometime. That's just the first problem. The second problem is what is bounded by the kinsman redeemer really belongs to Naomi. Ruth is a daughter-in-law from a foreign country that it really wouldn't belong to, but Boaz, he's okay with that. He's willing to go with the letter of the law and with the spirit of the law, not just the letter of the law. But there's another problem. Boaz realizes that if I'm going to follow the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, then between me and Ruthie, there's another closer relative who ought to be given first choice at this arrangement. Yeah, Ruth was kind of a little bit of a piece of property in those days. Boaz, what a guy. Man, he's something else. So chapter 4 takes us to wrapping this story up where Boaz goes to the city gate. This is where you made deals. Boaz goes to the city gate and he meets this closer relative to Ruth. And he says to this relative, he says, hey, you heard Naomi's back in town, right? Oh, yeah. Did you know Naomi has some property that she still claims title to, and she's going to sell it? Oh, really? And because I'm a kinsman, I am willing to buy that from her and redeem that property through the kinsman redeemer process, unless you want to do it, because you're closer, so you really ought to have first rights, first option. And the other guy says, okay, well, I want that property, absolutely. So, yeah, thanks for letting me know about it. We'll take care of it right now. And Boaz says, oh, by the way, there's a woman that goes with that property. So if you want the property, you also have to marry Ruth, the Moabite, the widow from another land. And the fellow says, well, this is what he says. Chapter 4, verse 6. At this, the guardian redeemer said, then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. I'm wondering if that included his current wife's feelings. So he says, so you redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. Then it says, now in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the garden redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself, and he removed his sandal. But this is not exactly how it worked in earlier times. So to look at that, we have to go to Deuteronomy chapter 25 and start in verse 7. And it says, however, if a man does not want to marry his brother's wife, that's the brother's widow, she shall go to the elders at the town gate and say, my husband's brother refuses to carry on his brother's name in Israel. He will not fulfill the duty of her brother-in-law to me. And then the elders of the town shall summon him and talk to him. And if he persists in saying, I do not want to marry her, his brother's widow shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, take off one of his sandals, spit in his face, and say, this is what is done to the man who will not build up his brother's family line. That man's line shall be known in Israel as the family of the unsandaled. Well, I don't understand this. Times change, so maybe things got watered down over a few centuries. Or maybe it's that you didn't have to be so technical because technically this whole law didn't apply. Maybe because this wasn't a brother and a brother thing, but a man and a very distant relatives. But what we do know is that they had a peaceful settlement. And that these two got married, Boaz and Ruth. And that the men of the town just said, this is a wonderful thing, and blessed them. And the women of the town went to Naomi and say, it's like you have a son again. And they lived happily ever after. And now you know the story of Ruth. Oh, I'm sorry, what does that have to do with Christmas, you're wondering? Well, it's funny, as you continue in this last chapter of Ruth, we come to the 21st verse. And it just gives a little bit of genealogy. It says Solomon, the father of Boaz, and Boaz, the father of Obed. And I'm pretty sure I've got this on some good information on this, that Obed, for about the first 12 years of his life, was talked to by his parents in such a way it became a nursery rhyme. Obed, go to bed. So that's where that nursery rhyme comes from. Obed, go to bed. Okay, so Solomon was the father of Boaz. Boaz was the father of Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse. And Jesse was the father of David. And if it just stopped there, it does stop there because that's as far as they could go when this was written down. But if you go to Matthew, the first chapter, and you start in the 6th verse, you see that we pick up here with other generations. And it says that David, he was the father of Solomon. And then you go through about 26 generations because Solomon was the great, if I could roll my R's, great grandfather of Jacob, who was the father of Joseph, who was the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called the Christ. And it brings home this full story that there was this lady who was engaged to be married to Joseph. And Joseph found that she was pregnant out of wedlock. And Joseph was a kind man. He didn't go by the letter of the law that would have said she could be stoned. But by the spirit of law, he said, I need to divorce her and let her off the hook easy. But God sent an angel, and that angel said to Joseph, no, this is God's baby. You complete the marriage with her, and you raise this kid. He is the Savior of the world. And we see that Joseph redeems Mary. Not just for social security, but so all of us can have eternal security. And none of that could have happened if what happened on the threshing floor with Boaz and Ruth hadn't occurred. So I hope that even right now, if you see a single shoe on the side of the road, or if you go to Kohl's or something to get some shoes and you pull that box off the shelf and you open up, there's only one in there, you just see the single shoe. Or you go get one of these shoes boxes from the corner of our entryway, I hope these reminders of shoes will remind you that there was a single shoe. And there was a book called Ruth. And there was the story of redemption, because that's the full circle of this story. So I close simply with this. First Baptist Church, Granbury, Merry Christmas.